I bet you were wondering when I was going to get around to doing this guy that's been in the background of all the other videos. I always regretted never having the opportunity to film this particular vehicle when it was as part of the Littlefield collection, the old MVTF. By sheer happenstance, I'm here doing some filming for Rock Island, and yeah, available in the auction block in May is the exact same Panzer 61. So I get to fix that little gap that I was never able to deal with before. The story of the Panzer 61 actually starts in 1951, when the Swiss realized that the usual tank building nations that might sell them some tanks were not making tanks available for export sale because the Korean War was going on, everybody was panicking, they were building for their own domestic production. The Australians actually had a fairly similar problem. The end result was that they started doing investigations, can they build their own tank? And while they're doing their various investigatings, the Swiss bought 200 AMX-13s and then in various batches, 300 Centurions. Now the Swiss armaments industry, which is not to be sneezed at, had developed domestically a 90mm gun, which this new tank was to be armed with, and indeed the first Panzer 58 came out with this 90. But Centurion introduced them to the 20-pounder. Well, guess what immediately got put into the next Panzer 58? After a brief period, however, the British introduced them to the L7 cannon, the 105, that just shows up everywhere. Immediately the Swiss decided, you know, maybe this is the gun that we want to put in our domestically designed tank. And so it was. The Panzer 61 started entering development for the 105mm cannon. The hull, like the turret, is cast single piece. It was subcontracted out to Georg Fischer of Schaffhausen. This is not a heavy tank, and the armor on the front is about 10 centimeters on the front, but because it's cast, it can thin down. So by the time you get up to about here, you're looking closer to 35mm. There are a couple of indications, though, that this is not your bog standard Panzer 51. Firstly, the headlights. The original Panzer 61 headlights were small little things that were mounted more like on the fenders. These are a little bit more updated. They have both the service lights, blackout markers, and they basically come off the Panzer 68, as does the splash guard, as does the anti-slip coating. You'll also see that unlike the original Panzer 61s, this gun has a thermal shroud. On the left side of the turret, disappointingly, there is no 20mm coaxial cannon. It is a 7.5. The Panzer 61 did come with a 20mm, but as part of the upgrade process, it was replaced by the 7.5. So what we actually have is a Panzer 61 AA9, which is effectively a Panzer 61 with a lot of the Panzer 68 upgrades. But some of the significant differences do still remain inside. It would appear that the track adjustment for the tension, I was going to mention it, is done as you would expect on the idler wheel. You can see the offset of the arm, but unlike a lot of systems, this one is done from the inside. You have to undo this and then insert a drive system, a shaft of some sort, in order to crank a worm drive, because I honestly can't think of another way of doing it. Moving to the side, starting with the tracks made of cast manganese, 50 centimeters wide, which is a little bit narrower than those of the Panzer 68. The track length in contact with the ground is 413, which is also a little bit shorter than that of the Panzer 68. So the differences are mechanical as well as in the fire control system and so on. The single pin tracks are obviously all metal, again unlike the Panzer 68. They are held in place by rings through which a retaining pin is placed. The suspension is one of those odd features of the Panzer 61. There are a couple of design decisions that I've only seen on this tank, very unique features, and the suspension is one of them. It looks simple enough. 6 pairs of large road wheels per side on swing arm suspension with bump stops to stop them going up too far. However, where you would ordinarily expect maybe torsion bars, this is Belleville Washers. And as far as I can tell, this is the only production tank to actually use them. There are a couple of prototypes built here and there. I can think of one or two German ones. But if there is a Belleville Washer tank, it doesn't come to mind. And there are some advantages with the suspension system. It's very compact for starters, doesn't take a hell of a lot of space, and it can be easily fine-tuned by adding rings or flipping the washers. On the other hand, I'm kind of curious as to what the full range of motion is of this system, which, I mean, I presume that there is a reason that no other tank that I can think of has been built with Belleville washers. Anyway, the whole system will span a 2.6 meter trench, climb a 75 centimeter wall. Moving up, this particular vehicle is well equipped. This is kind of rare on a museum piece. When the Swiss sold it, it looks like they sold it with a complete set of BII. So there's a jack with a jack block further down. On the far side, you've got anything from the grease gun to the bore brush for cleaning the cannon. And of interest is also that the BII, as you saw, they have mounting points inside the stowage bins, which you don't see very often. Very neat, these Swiss. Moving further up on the turret side, we can see another annoyance for photo ID is this ammunition port, which was not on the original Panzer 61s and apparently was added. Smoke launchers. You move further back, the bustle rack. Also a post-modification, not originally found on the Panzer 61s. It does beg the question where people would actually put their stuff on the Panzer 61, but they were given this bustle rack on the back, so they're all nice and happy now. And then at the back, of course, you come across the sprocket wheel and the rather distinctively sloping rear engine deck. Coming around to the back of the tank, a couple of interesting features worth noting. Firstly, note the design of the taillights. There's a couple of these little, that looks familiar moments as you're traveling around the tank. Main engine exhaust is on one side. The auxiliary motor exhaust is on the right. And interestingly, it looks like when you have to start this tank up, you start with the auxiliary motor, which then gives you the power to crank over the main motor. As you move a bit further back, now I don't know what the common language is of the Swiss military, but most of the symbology and signage inside this tank is in both German and in French. And as you would imagine behind here, you'll find the infantry telephone. A little feature that I don't often see that I can recall is, although usually the infantry telephone will allow you to speak to the tank crew, by lifting up, you enter transmit mode and you can broadcast on the radio as well. Let's move a bit further. Obviously you got your tow cables around the shackle with the towing pintle at the bottom and the gun crutch or travel lock. I'm not quite sure what the Swiss call it. Does exactly what it says on the tin, really. A neat little feature that I don't see often. This type of latch that kind of it tensions, you loose the tension on it, and you have this hinge in the middle with the wire around the hook. This is common. What I don't recall seeing very often, though, is this little piece of leather that you just thread down to make sure that this snap latch doesn't accidentally get unsnapped as you're traveling around, and then all your stowage gets strewn across the battlefield. Right, so next stop is the engine deck. Which is surprisingly easy to get up. Now, I'll give this for the Swiss. They thought about making life easy for the crew, subject to the fact that they should have made this flat so you could sleep on it instead of this angle down. I guess probably were saving weight or something. But you will see embossments and grips on the sheeting and anti-slip coating everywhere on this tank. Now, granted, the anti-slip wasn't originally there, it was added, but the rest of it is all very handy. Even opening up the engine deck is actually a very simple process. Instead of lots of big bolts, all they have is this little sliding sector here. So you lift up the central block, for the lack of a better word, and these little things slide up, out, and it releases these panels that you can start opening up. So, well, let's start about doing it. Unfortunately, unlike a lot of American vehicles I can name, these panels are not actually all that big and heavy. And don't get me wrong, you don't want to get your finger caught in them, but they're very doable. So now that I have it open, it wasn't actually all that difficult. I have to confess to you that I do not actually know what sort of hickeys these doohickeys do, because I don't have the manual and I've been burned a few times making educated guesses. I can tell you that the prime mover in the front is an MTU Mercedes-Benz 837 BA500. This is an 8-cylinder diesel, 29.9 litres, cranks out 630 horsepower. It's connected to a Swiss-designed transmission manufactured by SLM, semi-automatic system, 6 forward, 2 reverse. I suspect something to do with these. There is a second engine under here, also by Mercedes-Benz. It's an OM636. It's a little 1.8 litre 4-cylinder diesel, puts out about 31 horsepower. You may be familiar with it as perhaps the engine on some Unimogs, or perhaps the Mercedes 180D sedan from way back in the 50s. It's basically a car engine that they put in the side just to handle the auxiliary motor functions if the main engine isn't necessary. The whole thing is a power pack together with the cooling and exhaust systems. I mean, I really don't know why what looks like the secondary air intake cleaner is so large, but looking straight down you can see the quick disconnect for the final drive system. Removing the pack takes about an hour. As you come up to the turret roof, you're going to notice very quickly another of the rather unique features of the Panzer 61, and that is that there are 2 cupolas. The TC's cupola is, as you would expect, with a dome overhead hatch and then a number of periscopes scattered around. The loader also gets his own cupola with a clamshell door and a pintle mount for a 7.5mm machine gun. This does mean, though, that when you're buttoned up, the TC's observation is kind of limited off to the left-hand side, and he is going to be reliant on the loader actually looking out as well. Mounted between, it's been dismounted now, but it was a retrofit. They added Swedish Lyra launchers for flares, and they'd lob an illumination flare about 1,300 meters for night engagements. Moving further forward, you can see the spotlight, which has a simple trigger for turning on, and then there's a handle behind it. The light itself looks very familiar. I would almost hazard to say it is a headlight off an American vehicle. And finally, of course, you have the doghouse, the gunner's primary sight, which also, as near as I can tell, is the gunner's only sight. There is a lever inside that will allow you to lower the shield as necessary, and when the shield is lowered, as you can see, there is a little slit, so the gunner has some ability to engage and see what's going on, even when, let's say, under artillery or effective small arms fire. So that is as far as we're going to go in part 1. In part 2, we get to see 1 or 2 more unique features I've only ever seen on this Swiss tank. If I'm going to be telling you how thick the armour is on this, I need to find out first. And depending on what version of Jane's Armour and Artillery you're looking at, it gives you different answers. So out with the ultrasonic gauge, and let's see, is it 6 centimeters, 12 centimeters, or something else? The survey says 93 millimeters. The tracks are cast manganese. They're 5 centimeters wide, which is actually 5. The tracks are cast manganese. Oh, that's annoying.
This will be fun.
I just fed the turret monster a whole bunch of batteries.
What's that?
I just fed the turret monster a whole bunch of batteries.
Oh no. I don't see.
Seeing them is one thing, actually getting them is another matter entirely.